Hello and welcome once again to episode 84 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined by my fellow completionists, Spencer.
Hey there.
So lately I've been thinking a lot about the lack of precise input on iOS, and most recently this came up when I was trying to scan documents. So if you don't know, in the Notes app, you can go ahead and tap on the little image icon, and then you can say scan documents. And then you just hover your phone above the page, and it will automatically take a picture. You go to the next page. You just don't do anything. It just takes pictures, which is super convenient. However, sometimes it messes up with like the crop, and it gets it hilariously bad, where it's just like a trapezoid of some sort, and then your page is all like skinny at the bottom because it got too much table or whatever. And you need to go and adjust those corners, and that can be a maddening experience if you don't know exactly like what is expected of you. Like if you don't know, you can tap next to a point, not on the point, but next to a point, and still drag it, and that gives you a lot like better feedback, because if you're on the point, your finger is like covering it,
Right.
And separately, when I was setting up our circle view cameras, you can set up activity zones. Because I was getting mad at the like blinds kind of rolling with the wind, triggering alerts 3 times a minute. That was like driving me crazy. So I set up an activity zone, and that one does not work this way. So you cannot adjust the points precisely in any way. You just have a tiny little phone screen and tiny little giant finger to kind of move that around. And that drove me absolutely insane. So hence the topic for this week. How we as developers can give a better experience towards all of that. I guess let's start with adjusting the position of points, which I think is a super common thing that you see all over iOS apps. And no app really does this well, right?
No, and I mean, you've got things even built in like a slider, right? That depending on kind of how precise you want things to be in the slider, you know, if you're going through, decimal points and you just need something to be super fine, you could experience it not just in kind of these more specific cases of like these crop points, which not every app is going to have, but it seems more like a systematic problem with just, like you say, just any kind of precise user input or interaction with these UI elements. So, I mean, the problem here is, of course, you've got no mouse, no pointer. You can't use a trackpad, which I was just thinking about yesterday. I've got my phone right below my monitor, just on a little charging stand. It would be so cool to just drag Slack down.
Universal control.
Yes, universal control, and just do that so it's not on my screen. I wish they would do it, man. I get that it's a tiny little screen, but I think it would be super
Fernando
cool.
would be proud.
Fernando, yes, right up Fernando's alley. But you've got things like the magnifying view that has been around for quite a while on iOS for like selecting text, right? Your finger is probably 2 times the height of whatever text you're trying to select, but then it pulls up the magnifying view in some form. It's changed a little bit over the versions of iOS. But then it kind of puts the text above or below wherever it needs to in order to show what you're actually selecting. So there are definitely workarounds, but they may not come for free, I suppose.
Yeah, in fact, unless you're doing text entry in a text field or text view, you're not going to get any of this. So things that you need to like worry about, as like I would suggest anyone, like if you're listening and not driving a car and can pull out your phone safely, like do this exercise with us. Like pull out notes, type a bunch of text, and just try selecting around it. So if you tap and hold on the insertion pointer, you get that little magnifying glass above you. And it's offset from your finger. Crucially, it's not under your finger. It's offset from your finger because otherwise you can't see it. Scanning app. So that is something that you need to like move out of the way so that way you can actually see it, because our hands are connected from the bottom usually. So above is a great place to put it. I think if you're at the top of the screen, it might try to put it at the bottom under like very rare circumstances, but above is always what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you if you move your finger upwards, you'll notice that the magnifying view kind of goes with you. But if you
Yeah.
go down, something very interesting is going to happen. It's going to detach from your finger slightly. And you're going to be able to see the insertion pointer without the magnifying view anymore. And that is because it is allowing you to detach your finger from the insertion pointer by yourself. And once you do that, once you get a sufficient point away from that, it acts as a proxy. So you're no longer manipulating the thing under your finger, you're manipulating a proxy with your finger acting kind of like a trackpad. And that is a key detail that I think a lot of these apps miss, because that allows you to like get it out of your way, right? You can go ahead and use your finger just like a mouse would. Your mouse is not on your screen. You're not like using it to obstruct whatever you're working with. You're moving the mouse pointer as a proxy, and this is very, very important. And it's crucial to pull off well, because unless you do that, like you're always going to have something covering something else.
Yeah. I mean, this all just, it almost goes back to last week where we were talking about accessibility. It's like there's there's a lot that you can do to just make your app more accessible to people, in many ways, and this is one of like, if due to whatever limitation, whether it's the screen size or not, whether it's the,
Size of people's fingers.
exactly. Some people have just absolute sausage fingers, and that's okay. But they need that magnifying glass or whatever it is, in order to be able to use whatever they're trying to use on the app or their phone well.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, it's important to think about these things and make your app usable and accessible for everyone, or anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and as you mentioned, like large fingers can have an impact on this a lot. We don't think of this very much, but when your finger touches the screen, it kind of rolls. And
mhm.
as it rolls, the average point of like contact changes. So if you're trying to manipulate something very carefully, you'll be like very slowly moving. You'll get it perfect, and then you'll lift your finger. And by lifting your finger, you're unrolling it. And by unrolling it, you're moving the point, and your app is detecting that. It's like, hey, the point's moving. So then you move it, and it's off. And then you
Yeah.
drive the user mad. And that's another key piece that the text views do right. And you'll notice it's very hard to roll your finger in a way that's going to change the selection once you precisely like position it. And as a developer, that's hard to do. Like you basically have to detect no movement, and use that as like an anchor point. And if the user lifts their finger and there was movement, you throw that away. You basically undo that movement.
Right.
So you still have like direct manipulation, but you kind of throw away data purposefully if you notice that the user is very slow and then they went fast, because that fast movement was accidental.
So, and then you've got things like, using the keyboard, or I guess now it's just the space bar, as far as I know,
Mm-hmm.
to change like the insertion point, or basically the cursor for like text, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think before, when you had a 3D touch phone, you could kind of hard press on any part of the keyboard, and it would
It was so
basically
nice.
turn. It was so, I miss 3D touch, man. I was
Mm-hmm.
one thing where I was like, it's okay. And then it went away, and I was like, ooh, I actually do use this for a fair amount of things. So,
All the time. That
yeah.
said, I got very used to it fairly quickly. That the keyboard is like the new like special
Uh-huh.
area for that. I thought it would take me years to
Hmm.
unlearn years of like 3D pressing on the keyboard.
Yeah. But now you just hold on the space bar, and it does the same thing. It turns the whole keyboard area, kind of that thing that pops up, into a trackpad, just blanks out all the keys, and you can move the cursor around, which is great because before, I mean, you've got the option of tapping on a place in the text field and kind of dragging it around, but sometimes that starts selecting text, and it can be a little bit of a pain. So
Mm-hmm.
having the being able to kind of use the keyboard as a trackpad or a mouse is nice. So you've I guess what I'm trying to say is you've got that, you've got the just tapping to insert. There are a couple different ways depending on who you are. Maybe, I mean, I remember talking to my brother, who just got a new phone like last year or something. I think he got like the iPhone 12, and the phone that he had before that was like an iPhone 10 or something. and it had 3D touch. And so he was devastated. And then I did that in front of him on the new phone. He's like, how did you do that? I didn't know you could do that anymore. I was like, oh, yeah. So it's nice that there are multiple ways that you can do the same thing, essentially, because the user may not even know about some of these things. So.
And you can do like some crazy things. If you didn't know, you can tap elsewhere on the keyboard while you're dragging around like a trackpad, and that will start selecting text. It'll like anchor you wherever you are, and then mark that as a selection point. And this goes further. Like on the Mac, if you double click a word, if you double click your mouse, you select a word. If you triple click your mouse, you select a paragraph. Same on iOS. Like all of these interactions kind of carried over, and that's important. It's important to use the Mac as like a good baseline if an interaction doesn't exist on iOS. People will oftentimes try it by accident, and it will, if it works, you've won them over like instantly, because they'll notice it's broken everywhere else except in your app. And it's not something that your app had to teach them. It's just something they already knew from a different platform. So if there is like a favorite interaction you have in your Mac apps, like carry it forward to your iOS app, and you'll be pleasantly surprised, even if you never tell anyone about it, by who accidentally discovers it. Because like they're not necessarily going to be trying, let's see if this works. They're just going to do it out of muscle memory, or not really muscle memory because it's like different muscles involved, but like
just they're used to that interaction on a Mac.
Yeah, exactly. And one more thing that I want to bring up for text editing is that when you are typing on the keyboard, something that the iPhone did very early on, which no physical keyboard could ever do, was it would resize the tap areas of the keys as you're typing based on what it thought you would type. Just so that way the feedback you get, it looks like relatively like in line with what you're going for. So even if it needed to autocorrect afterwards to say like, oh, you meant this letter, not that one, it can go ahead and show you the feedback of the key that you're typing based on like which one you actually meant to type. Like for instance, if you tapped on the key R but you meant to tap on the E would highlight, even though your finger is on the R very clearly, and that's because E is like a super common letter, so therefore you have a higher chance of wanting to type an E rather than an R. But if you double tap the R, if you said RR, that would become an ER, because an ER is a super common ending in English, for instance. So there's a lot of smarts that go into the little things like this that you probably would never think about. And it's good to like stop and think about all the little interactions to see how would someone implement this, and you might discover through that process alone how they actually did, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that they do the all of that correction, and sometimes it can be annoying. But I think like I notice the times when it's annoying, but I don't notice the times when it's great, and it fixes things for me. So kind of a little bit of a bias there. But then you've got oh, go for it.
Oh, I was going to say the machine learning autocorrect is garbage. Like, I hate that. I want the dumb autocorrect back, the one that assumes that you can't spell, and just, like, we'll fix those, rather than change words to, like, italic, crazy math font. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I've gotten that several times. I've even posted it to Twitter. It's ridiculous. I don't ever want that. So please get rid of that. Bring it back to sanity. Like, the English language is not changing that fast. Okay, done with rant. Go for it.
Okay. I just wanted to say, like, now that so like going back to my example of sliders, I have this fresh in my mind, and I'll bring up why. You've got like adjustments, that you could do kind of adjacent to, but not by using the slider. So as an example, in LumaFusion, you've got, a bunch of adjustments for size, for you've got, filters that you can change, all kinds of things, and they're all using sliders for the most part. And so what we had were little nudge arrows on each side where you could say, I'm going to get this as close as I can with sliding because that's fast. And then if you need to nudge it over like 0.1 or whatever, you can nudge it over, and that's great. So that's one way to kind of adjust after you do most of the work, I suppose. Um, and then what we noticed was that people wanted even more fine grain control, and so that was like the biggest, the first sort of semi big feature that I ended up working on when I after I started there was this keypad that would let you just like type in numeric values exactly as you wanted. And you could get it literally to, you know, whatever decimal point that you wanted, that it supports. And so, you know, if you're like, oh, I need it to be in 34.46 or whatever, you don't have to sit there and go with the slider and then nudge. You just 34.46 and it's done. So you can kind of make these like adjacent adjustments to these interactions that are not necessarily precise, and you can't necessarily make them precise, although I just thought it would be kind of cool to make a slider that once you sort of like decelerate enough, it pulls up sort of again like a magnifying glass type of thing, where then you could have finer grain control, like kind of like the scrubbing in like on a video. You kind of got levels of scrubbing. Something like that would be cool.
Yeah, so what Spencer's describing is as you're scrubbing, like if your finger is on the timeline, it will just scrub. If you move your finger up, now you're like scrubbing within a smaller region of the timeline. Like the whole width of the screen is only going to move your playhead a tiny little bit, and the further up you go, the less and less it moves. Now this is a great for like video or any timeline that like is sufficiently large, but you don't need like specific accuracy getting a specific number, because that is maddening. If you want to do something like that for a slider that's going to output a value that you can see, always round to some decimal point. People like round numbers like tremendously. So if you can pick like increments, like if you go only a tiny bit down, now you're in fourths of an increment, you know, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, all the way. If you go down further from that, then you're in tenths. If you go further than that, then you're in 20ths, and so on and so forth. But you have these discrete like steps. That is going to make your users tremendously more happy, because they want round numbers at the end of the day. They don't really care that it's 0.2573, right? They're not looking at the output of their slider. They're looking at the number that the slider is giving them. And they're like, this one's nice and round. And that's going to make them, like, legitimately, that's going to make them happier than getting the text exactly where they want it. Now, sometimes from there, they're going to want to nudge or advance. And that's where those arrow keys are useful. And the crucial thing about those arrow keys, which I've seen tons of people mess up, they need to be more precise than your finger movement, right? If you can get that level of precision with your finger, and then the arrow like moves it wildly out, and you're like, what the hell? Like, I was more precise with my finger. Like, the arrow needs to be more precise than your finger. Maybe you can adjust that. Maybe before you touch the slider, it's like in large increments, and then once you touch a slider, then it's in small increments. Maybe you show that by making the arrows a little bit smaller, like as an indication that that's going to happen. There are all sorts of affordances that you can invent to get that working well. For the crop points that I brought up earlier, maybe the last crop point that you tap, then you have little arrows all around it, and you can just tap those to nudge it ever so slightly with the magnifying glass, so you can actually see, like, get it right where you want it and satisfy that OCD. So, there are lots of ways that you can do this. Maybe swipes, like I'm just brainstorming here at this point. But maybe if you swipe on one of these controls, that would increment it just by a notch without having arrow keys. So it's not necessarily a full-on drag. You would need to detect the difference between a swipe and a drag. Oftentimes you want to do that anyways. And like, you don't want to necessarily just kick off into a drag just by touching it by accident. It's like, oh, I'm getting some lint off my screen, and then you suddenly moved your carefully positioned slider. Like, that's something that you're going to do after carefully positioning a slider. You're going to notice a piece of hair or something, you're going to try to get rid of it, and you're going to move your slider. Like, that is something that everyone is going to run into, because like they want to get rid of the hair that's on the screen, but no one is going to be happy with at the end of the day. But if you just put a little delay before detecting a drag, that's done and satisfied, right?
Yeah, definitely a lot of. I I don't even want to really call them workarounds because I mean I guess it's a workaround to the
They're
built-in
affordances,
controls that
right?
we. Yeah, just these ways of enhancing or augmenting what is available to you for sure.
It reminds me of video games specifically, like the more amount of affordances that video games add to make them fun and not grueling. Like specifically select. I'm gonna need to find the thread, and I might not find it because Twitter search is horrible. But someone went over all the affordances that Celeste will do. So this is a platforming game that's tremendously difficult, but it's not difficult because the game is making it just like pain in the ass difficult. It's difficult because it's challenging and it's always surmountable. Like you just need the practice. And you'll notice if you jump and you slightly miss a ledge, it's going to put you on that ledge. It's going to have
Yeah.
code specially there to get you there. If you jump and do a wall jump and you're not touching the wall, it's going to allow you to do the wall jump just because it knows that it's more fun to be able to pull off the wall jump and still fail than it is to not be able to operate the controls at all, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Make it. I mean, it's almost making it accessible. It's just making it like the tolerance is like human, like you're able to deal with it as a human, and you know if it's pixel perfect, that may be a little bit more annoying for sure. Speaking of pixel perfect, you've got things like large tap areas where like if you've got a small button. It's hard to tap. Again, people have different size fingers, and fingers get pressed down, and then that even increases the size on the screen even more. So, just going back to like the keyboard example, right? Especially if, I don't know, if you're on like an iPhone Mini and you have large fingers, that would be really hard. It's not like you are, you put your finger down, you may be touching two keys, but really it knows you want one key or you want one button in whatever situation. So like it's generally suggested, and Dimitri has in the notes in here, like the original iPhone suggested 46 points for a button, even if that made, the button didn't look like it. The sort of the I guess
The
bounds
tap
of the
area.
touch area, the tap area, would be a lot larger than the button itself, just to make it easy. Again, we're not dealing with a mouse or a trackpad where you can get very, very precise movements very easily because you have a lot more control there. You're kind of, mashing your finger on the phone. You got to make it easy, kind of an equivalent level of ease for the kind of touch device that you have, which is your finger or your nose if you're Dimitri trying to interact with your
Operated
watch.
on a watch.
Yeah, depending.
And those 46 points, those were for the original iPhone's density, and therefore the iPhone 4's Retina density. That does not apply anymore to things like the iPhone Mini or the iPhone Maxes, I believe, also have a different density. So recalculate it, do the division to see like how large that surface area is, and know that it matters more vertically than it does horizontally. Like horizontally, we're actually quite precise. Because we use like a nubbin of our finger rather than the whole thing. But vertically, there's actually a lot of tricks that are going on, and you can see this if you like wake up your phone and put it on a table and then turn it upside down and try to tap things. You'll notice it's impossible to tap anything because you need to tap underneath the thing for it to register, because the device will automatically adjust your touch point because it knows that you're going to be off. So it has a built-in adjustment. Therefore, and I believe, you need to attach underneath the physical place where it is visually, because your finger is going to be higher always.
Cool.
And if you turn your phone, if you turn your phone around so you're looking at it upside down, but it's on a table so it doesn't flip the UI, you'll notice this immediately, how everything is like impossible to tap. But if you adjust like your position, it'll be a lot easier. So that's why the 46 points really matters vertically, because that's where you need the most leeway. And as Spencer said, like a great way to get away around like not visually making your buttons ginormous, but having them like visually nice looking, and then having the touch areas be very have a ton of affordance there, is to use point inside. So if you override point inside in your control, you can give it a much larger tap area than its bounds, than its drawing bounds. This means that layout is tremendously easy because you just lay out your control like normally. But then when it comes time to the user interacting with it, the super view is going to ask, hey, does this point land inside of your bounds? And your view is going to be like, yep, I'm really big. So that's going to be a lot easier. And similarly, when you're like interacting with a button, you can press on it and then say, never mind, and drag your finger away and unselect it. That area should be even larger. So that one should be really large. So that way the user just like bumping on a bus is not going to unselect the button while they're like trying to interact with it. So make that area as large as it needs to. Use like UI button as a good like starting point because that takes care of it for you, obviously. And that should give you a decent amount of control there.
Nice. Yeah, that's really interesting about the like flipping your phone or your iPad upside down like that, or leaving it in the same orientation and then trying to use it upside down. I didn't know about that. I guess it makes sense. I don't know. Now I have to try it. I'm really curious and interested to mess around with that a little bit.
Yeah, I think if you have like mail open, it's easy because you have like distinct rows, and if you try to like go right in between two rows, it might not like go exactly where you think it would go. So that's something that you can try. It's been adjusted over the years, of course, as Apple has like fine-grained, nailed down. And maybe they're looking at you through the Face ID camera now. They know your fingers coming in from above. So like, let's adjust this. But yeah, so I guess one last thing in this category that you should keep in mind is if you have a bunch of controls that are all like operating together, like a segmented control where you have a bunch of buttons, let the user start tapping on one of them, but then move to the next one. And allow them to select that. So they all kind of operate with the same gesture in mind. And that's difficult to do. Like you need to plan ahead for something like that, have it all be coordinated properly. But it usually allows the user to get adjust their movement like once they've started the event and their finger stops rolling, and get exactly what they want or change their mind. And it gives them a lot of flexibility.
So, on iPad, for example, now we do have cursors, which is super great. I mean, it was kind of interesting, the progression of the like allowing cursors on an iPad, where at first it was an accessibility feature, and then I think it was like the next full version of iOS. They were like, yeah, okay, we'll just allow this. And now they've got, entire hardware keyboards that have a trackpad and everything. And I think, at least for me, that was something that made me use my iPad a ton more because of that precise interaction. Just like I before then I had just like the normal full keyboard folio, which was great, but I wasn't typing things all the time. But as soon as it allows you to not have to, like we were talking about with Windows tablet or Windows computers, where you have to physically touch things when it's kind of in that orientation, it's not a great experience. But now we've got an actual trackpad. It's in a more natural kind of state. It of course allowed for a lot more kind of precise interactions with UI, and now we do have just kind of this single point where it's a lot smaller than your finger, of course. So something that's cool is you can have different cursors, and I know that we're working on that right now in LumaFusion, or at least we were. I can't quite remember, but it doesn't just have to be the circle, but you can actually have it select like focus points. So you can kind of it's a great way to like let your user know what are you selecting, right? Instead of it just kind of being this cursor, it'll kind of expand and like take on the shape and kind of stick a little bit to a button or whatever. And so while it's precise. I don't know, for if we're just talking about the that physical hardware trackpad, it's fairly small. You don't have a ton of room to kind of, move around and stuff. It's not a giant iPad track or Mac trackpad. So I think like that's one example of it kind of allowing you. It's like this happy medium in between like a normal Mac cursor interaction where it's just what you see is what you get, and it kind of helps you along into the different UI elements of whatever app you're working in to know what you're actually selecting or interacting with.
Mm-hmm. I mean, not to mention it can change its shape too. Like when you're
Yeah.
working with text, it will change to an insertion pointer, but that insertion pointer is really cool because it will jump to the lines that you can actually edit. So it has like a combination of both of those where you never want to select text in between lines. Like that's an impossibility. But you can automatically have it jump to lines so that way hey, I'm in this line. I don't need to worry about the vertical movement. I just need to worry about the horizontal movement. I want to change lines, just move it down and it will jump to the other lines. And you feel really precise because now you feel like, you're spot on, right?
Because you are,
Yeah, because you are. It doesn't quite do that in between characters as well. Like, I think that would be a little too much. But they likely played around with it and saw like how it felt because it's an obvious next step to that. And if you're working in like a productivity app, say my cropping example, you can have it automatically jump to those corners. But then once you're interacting in that corner, you're clicking and dragging, that can be super precise, right? And in fact, you can potentially, like on iPad, you can't really do this. So this is like a false hope that I'm giving, but potentially in the future, what you could do is once you click and drag, now you don't have the same amount of movement that you would have otherwise had to move across the screen. You have more precision in that point to kind of get it exactly where you need to. And you can't do this on iPad, but you can do this on the Mac because you can manipulate the mouse directly. And lots of games do this, for instance, just to allow you to move with your mouse. Like the mouse is constantly repositioned to the center of the screen in a kind of gimmicky way if you turned it on, but it's hidden so you don't see that. So it allows you to like move around and look with your mouse. That's how that actually works.
Yeah. And then on an iPad, you can have a physical keyboard. So you could, have it select your crop point in some way and know that that's selected, and then just use the arrow keys to, pixel by pixel or by 10 points or whatever.
Who knew there are special buttons just for that?
Wow, that's crazy. But I mean, Dimitri's example of like having it pull up arrows around the corner of the crop point would be really cool. But on an iPad, you don't even need that. You just need to pick up the key press, and you're golden. Just have that translate to whatever amount of movement you want. That'd be pretty cool. You use modifiers to, you hold the shift key and it moves it over 10 points. If it's not, it moves it over 1 point. Yeah, I mean, these are all of these pretty standard things that people would be used to if they know text selection to move, instead of one character they move a word or whatever it is. That could be easily translatable into sort of these custom interactions with these custom UIs or controls that you would be dealing with.
I mean, the web inspector has the best implementation of this. When you click on text or a number specifically, like 10 points in a margin, you can use your arrow keys up and down. Shift will go by 10. Option will go by 0.1. And I forget what shift option does, but that also has like a specific interaction. So definitely go play around with different examples of this. There are some better than others. Some only use shift. Some also use option. Some use option for different things. So see what feels the best for your like specific need. Because obviously like the scanning app is not going to need that necessarily level of precision, but it might need shift and option to get like a macro or a micro adjustment. To kind of get it exactly where you want it to be. Because usually you're only using the arrow keys for the final like piece. Unless you're always on the keyboard, you're going to use the arrow keys to move a giant amount of space, which is where like shift comes in handy. But generally, like that's not necessarily the case for like a special area in your app where you just need it for some minute adjustments. You can assume that the arrow keys are going to be for minute adjustments. They don't need to translate to pixels. They just need to translate to something that makes sense for what the user is doing. So I have two smaller points to bring up. One is sometimes you have a bunch of points that are all in the same area. So in an app I'm working on, we had a bunch of annotations that you can kind of attach to like an image, and those annotations might all be in the same place. So something you can do very easily is when you tap on one of those, one of them pops up, but you want to tap on the one that's right next to it, right? Well, we sausage fingers once again. Just tap in the same area and intelligently pick the next one that's under it. And you can do this with hit test and just keep track of which one's selected and go for the next one. That's a really obvious way of doing that. You can rearrange the subviews. You can move the one that you just tapped to the bottom of the list. That's another way of doing that. That's another easy way of allowing the user precise interaction with something that's going to inherently be imprecise. Like even with a mouse, that's very hard. And because a mouse is precise, no one thinks about it. But because fingers are super imprecise, like that's an easy thing, an easy win that you can get. Similarly, with drag and drop, that's like another set of interactions that you really need to think more about than you would otherwise think to do. For instance, when you are in a scroll view, your main interaction is going to be scrolling. So if you want to drag and drop, you need to like press and pause there for a little bit for it to like enable. And it's great to give your user some interaction or visibility into when the gesture has kind of activated. And usually that can be shown by showing any movement at all. So if you press and hold and there's no movement yet, you're still scrolling. But as soon as the movement starts, you should be able to drag and drop. You shouldn't have to wait for the zoom to like happen all the way before that drag and drop is ready, because users will want to do that as fast as possible, and they recognize that they can either scroll or drag and drop. So allow them to know like exactly when it's going to happen. Alternatively, give them an alternate tap area that's very small, but always going to invoke it right away, right? Okay. So you have that opposite effect. Instead of a large tap area where you need to tap and hold, you have a small tap area where you never need to tap and hold, but it's always going to like drag and drop immediately. And I think table views use that for reordering cells. I believe that one has like a very precise amount of movement, or you can tap and hold and you get the less precise, like you can be outside of those bounds. So combining those is often very useful. Similarly, when you're like getting towards the bottom of the screen, you want auto scroll to start, and then things start moving, because as you move your thing, things reshuffle around it. You want to not be too neurotic about that. Like it's very easy to make that happen super fast, and then the user like can't ever reposition something because it's always going to go by 3 items or more, and that is going to also be very hard for them. So something you can do is allow regular scrolling with another finger. We have lots of them at our disposal. So even though auto scrolling is happening, you can say, auto scrolling, you're too slow, let me just scroll with my other finger. That allows auto scrolling to be very precise. Like you're not going to lose your point in the process, but you still have the ability to quickly navigate around the scroll view.
Yeah, totally. Going back to, well, yeah, I mean, with table views, it's interesting to see, again, now we've got something like this where you can scroll through things individually, but like going back, you can tell that let's see, how would I say this? Apple thought about this. I mean, I just think of like the music app, or I guess it would have been the iPod app back in the day. But you have the, I always forget what it's called. I've used it like one time myself, but the little strip it's like the alphabet strip on the right, that you can scroll through the table view quickly to get to a certain, a starting character or whatever. Like these interactions, you can tell that they thought about it and they knew that it would be an issue. But again, going back to having multiple ways of solving the problem depending on your use case can be really nice. So
Context still has that. So it's called the index list. It's a built-in, like the collection, the table view will allow you to just enable it. I think it moved to scroll view. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's called the index list. And I was always curious, like this was made for small phones. Like what happens when you have like Japanese characters, and there's a lot more of those than there are English letters. And it actually just shows like, oh, here's A dot dot dot. Now we're at K dot dot dot. Now we're at S dot dot dot. And it has a very an alternative appearance to display that. Something I really liked about iPhoto on the Mac is when you started scrolling, it would show you a little view of like exactly which month you were in or which event you were looking at while you're rapidly scrolling. And that allows you to, like, again, very precisely know where you're going to land, right? And I think Calendar does that. If you're in the year view and you scroll quickly, you'll get the months at the top. And that will allow you to know where you are during this fast movement. Like, you can be fast and precise. You don't have to, like, choose, oh, I'm slow or I'm precise. You can have both. You just need to give the user affordances to be able to pull that off, right?
Yep, definitely.
And then I guess the last thing I have on my list is to use gestures to, like, great effect. And what that means is don't necessarily invent new gestures, but see what gestures people are already using that you don't need to teach them. So, for instance, there is a tap to undo gesture with 2 fingers that you can do in almost every drawing app that users are going to expect. So if you're in a drawing app, you're oftentimes going to make the wrong stroke, like you're just going to slip. And the nice thing about digital drawing apps is you can undo, like it's not permanent. You don't have to now work that into your piece of art because you messed up, right?
Sure.
It's no longer a happy little tree. It's just going to be like, oh, pretend that never happened. And that is the de facto gesture now, because while you're drawing, it's really easy to like do that with your other hand or use that with the same hand that you're currently drawing with. So that is one that you probably want to copy in your own app just because people will expect it. Another one that I really like is only enabled in table views, but you can do it yourself elsewhere, is a 2-finger swipe downwards to select things. This allows you to select a bunch of things in table views very effectively. And it's a huge time saver rather than finding the select button and then tapping. You can just like have at it and auto scroll to a huge amount and say, oh, archive all these emails, please. And it will kind of take care of that. So that's what I hope to do once I hit 100,000 unread emails. I'm just going to have at it, search for GitHub, move all the GitHub ones, search for this, move all those, and so on and so forth. And then one last one that I want to call out in the app Linnea by the Icon Factory. I have no idea how to pronounce that, but it looks nice written. And they are a drawing app, and you can use the pencil to draw, right? However, you can use your finger to erase. It's like a whiteboard. Like, it's the most obvious interaction. You're never even going to think twice about it. It's just going to work. And that is something that I think we should strive towards when we have gestures in our apps, because that really enables things to be as, like, precise to the user's intention as possible, right?
Yeah, I think with all of these, what has kind of happened is someone has come up with some really good kind of intuitive, natural solution to augment the normal gestures that you would you would be used to just by using a phone. And what's cool is because they are intuitive, the user is going to pick up on it, whether it's just through accidentally two-finger tapping on their canvas to undo, and they're like, oh sweet, what happens if I do 3 fingers? And then it redoes or redoes, performs
Redoes.
a redo. But then because they are used to that, if you are making a similar app where you're like, you know what, that would be great, I would say, like, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Just use that in that exact same interaction, because they're already going to be used to it. There's no need to be like, oh, I have to make my own unique interaction or gesture to perform this same thing. It's like, no, it's not like every single app has a different command for undoing. It's just Command Z. You know what it is. Just use that, because that the user is going to be used to it. And ultimately, what you should be striving for is making the usage of your app as seamless and kind of painless as possible to the user. So, just just yoink that little interaction from someone else's app and use it in yours. Of course, if it applies, I'm not really sure you should, I don't know. I don't have a good example, but if it makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, if you don't need a pinch gesture, don't put in a pinch gesture.
Exactly. Yeah.
In other words, but yeah, this reminds me, like on the Mac, imagine an app that used Shift arrow keys to not move by 10 pixels, or if you were clicking and dragging something and you held down Shift, it scrolled diagonally and never horizontally or vertically. Like,
yeah, exactly.
There are specific ways you can drive people insane by knowing like what these things are, or option to create a copy. Like, those are just built-in muscle memory because so many apps have just adopted the same facilities for all of them. And the moment you change that, like if the left shift works differently than the right shift, like that's not a good thing. They're the same shift for a reason, because your mouse and hands are going to be in different points in space, and that's going to be more convenient here or there. So always keep in mind what the user might already know. And sometimes it's difficult. Maybe you didn't know about like 3-finger tap to bring in the undo little popover, and then you can go ahead and undo from there. And you're like, oh, let me reinvent the wheel. I'm going to use 4 fingers because I think that's a good undo gesture, when you didn't even know that the 3-finger one was there. So I guess that's kind of like what I was hoping to get out of this episode, is to kind of teach people about like all of these things that are kind of built in, but not like for free. That you would need to implement yourself. But now that you know about them, you can potentially think about spending that effort in a way that could help your users out more. Like, no one's going to thank you for like any of these. Well, maybe if you had enough of them, they would thank you specifically. It's like, hey, your app is so well polished, you got all these details right. But a lot of people are never going to notice because it works perfectly, right? Kind of like what you said, Spencer, about like you only notice when it does the wrong thing with the keyboard. So similar there. With that said, this week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Pennant. Calling all sports fans. Want to keep track of the season, but there's so many teams and not enough time? Check out Pennant. Pennant provides sports standings at a glance. Pennant displays league standings as a simple bar chart where the best teams rise to the top throughout the season. Of course, you can dig in deeper with team stats, game results, and more. Version 10 introduced the all-new customizable My Pennant view, where you can build a wide selection of visualizations for any sport, division, or team. Unlock Pennant Premium to add as many blocks as you'd like, and put any of them on your home screen as a widget. Whether you follow MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, or MLS, Pennant has you covered, with more sports and leagues coming soon. Thank you so much to Pennant for sponsoring Code Completion. Download Pennant on the iOS App Store today. So, in the past days, we stopped by the Apple Store to get my Mag... It's called MagSafe now again, right? The one for the laptops. So the MagSafe cable, whenever I would plug it in, it would just like blink amber. And no matter like what I looked up, it said, blinking amber means take to Apple Store. So I scheduled an appointment. I waited for said appointment. I took it to the Apple Store. And while waiting, because we got there too early, I was browsing around. And I happened across this Withings BPM Connect, which is a blood pressure monitor. I was like, oh, it's the beats per minute Connect. No, it's the blood pressure monitor Connect.
Yeah.
I made that connection afterwards. And it is made by Withings, who makes a lot of like health related connected devices. Like, we already have their scale from like years ago, and we really like it. So I was like, hey, I am stressed lately. Let's see if this is having a negative outcome on my health. So I figured before going to the doctor and them like prescribe me to a whole bunch of medications telling me that I'm going to die if I don't like change my lifestyle, I'm going to get ahead of that and start recording my blood pressure now, so that way I can see if it's on an upward trend or a downward trend. So inside the box, you have this very nice looking blood pressure monitor. It unravels, and this is the device on this end. What's really nice is this whole thing kind of like holds together via a simple little magnet right at the bottom of the sleeve. so it doesn't like unravel on its own. I was like, oh, is it Velcroing? And there is Velcro here, but it's not actually sticking to the side of the fabric. It's that little magnet that's right at the tip of that. So I found that cool. And then it's very simple to operate. You just kind of like slip it on, set it up once, and then it will connect via Wi-Fi. It has like a 6-month battery or whatever, though I just plug it in every night because lithium batteries, they like being plugged in. And then it just has this one button. So you press it to turn it on. It has, I don't think you'll be able to see it, but a nice little segmented display. That's like transparent through the plastic, so that's a nice touch. And then you press it again and it'll start inflating. And then at the end you can press and hold to change users. Like I didn't realize, like, how do I change this for my wife to be able to use it? And you just press and hold and it'll select a different name, and then press to save it. And I'd say that's probably the one downside of the one button approach, is just having a single button means that no one is going to be able to like really feel confident once they like record. It's like, oh, it shows Lynn. What do? Do I press? That will select it. Do I press and hold? That will change it. But then it's going to go to guest, and then it's going to go to Dimitri. It's like, just put arrow buttons. Like there's space. Like
more precise control.
Yeah, more precise control. So other than that, I would say I'm reasonably happy with it. It has woken me up to maybe doing a little better of taking care of my body. Though I'm still not in like any sort of danger zone, so that's also a knock on wood, thankful outcome of that. So, yeah, overall, I would say I'm fairly happy with the purchase. It was easy to set up with the Withings app. It syncs with the health app. And nice. Other than the fact that, yeah, more buttons are good. Even if it's just like an up and down from there, like you can select and then you can go up and down. Yeah, that would be super helpful. Because then I wouldn't need a guess as to if a single press or a press and hold is going to do something. Especially since they changed it in their firmware. So when I read it up on their docs, I was like, I don't know what firmware I have. It says press and hold, so I'm pressing and holding. Or if I press the change and it's like the firmware's use the opposite interaction, and I tried updating it and it doesn't change to the newer firmware, so I don't know. Is it just an older model that was at the Apple store? I don't know. So it's just like more buttons would have solved all of this. So yeah. Though I do like the segmented display because it does show you, like, here's an example on the thing. It does show you like your results right afterwards. It's like enough for like 5 digits, and then your like name will scroll by like a ticker.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I really like it.
Nice.
So anyways, as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at CodeCompletion to know when new episodes get released, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. So once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Bouniol. That's DimitriBouniol, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
So as like a super short commented out, I guess we can reveal that we've been live streaming this whole episode, and it seems to have not exploded.
Yes.
Is that still true? Let me double check.
Let me go back to the YouTube's thing is not very intuitive.
Yeah, it seems to be working because you said YouTube's thing is not very intuitive, and then I just heard YouTube's thing is not very intuitive right after that, and I was like very confused, and then I realized it was streaming that. It seems my show notes are also like streamed, but they're like super pixely, so it's like I don't know if you can see.
I was gonna say I always just pull up the show notes on my screen too, so I don't even know if you need to do that if we were gonna do it next week or whatever. So.
Okay, I figured it's useful because I can like select stuff and like make it obvious. But yeah, I guess I can use it as like a presenter's display. I can show stuff on it. It's a show and tell that the podcast listeners will never get to see, because you don't need to see it because the audio format. Yay! Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. But streaming seemed to work. So
Good.
I guess we'll give next episode a try, which will be our like WWDC preview episode. And then we'll immediately find out how wrong we were with our upcoming follow-up episode of WWDC results, which will probably be right afterwards. So
Yeah,
we'll be sure to tweet about that.